Breaking tonight from Paris, Canada's Minister of International Trade has just landed in the French capital for one of the most consequential G7 meetings of the year, and the timing could not be more dramatic. Maninder Sidhu arrived in Paris this week for the second G7 trade ministers meeting of 2026, hosted by France on May 5th and 6th. On paper, the agenda reads like routine multilateral business, critical mineral supply chains, non market practices, low value parcels, World Trade Organization reform. But, dear viewers, behind that diplomatic language is a global trading system that has just been shaken to its foundations. And Canada has walked into the room as one of the few G7 members with a clear plan. Let me explain what SDU is actually walking into. Last Friday, Donald Trump threatened to hike American tariffs on cars and trucks coming out of the European Union. The threat detonated days before this G7 meeting was scheduled to begin. According to French officials, the ministers will not even formally address the new American tariff threat in Paris. Translation: the United States and the European Union are too far apart to discuss it at the same table. U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer is expected to meet EU Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic separately in the French capital. The G7 trade family is meeting in Paris while two of its most powerful members essentially talk past each other, and that is not even the biggest story in the room. Because while the ministers gather inside French government buildings this week, the global economy is reeling from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 1/5 of the world's oil normally flows. The repercussions of the Middle East war are expected to dominate the informal session on Tuesday. Energy security, supply chain resilience, and the durability of the multilateral trading system are no longer abstract talking points. They are the daily reality of an industrial world looking at unstable oil markets and an unpredictable American partner. Dear viewers, this is the room SDU just walked into, and he did not arrive empty-handed. Canada's pitch to its G7 partners has been crystallizing for months. It rests on three pillars, and each one looks stronger as the world looks more chaotic. The first pillar is critical minerals. Canada holds 31 priority critical minerals. It possesses 10 of the 12 defense critical minerals that NATO has identified. The inputs for batteries, semiconductors, advanced manufacturing, electric vehicles, and increasingly the weapon systems Western militaries are racing to build. Last October, on the margins of the G7 Energy and Environment Ministers meeting in Toronto, the Canadian government launched the Critical Minerals Production Alliance and unveiled the first round of strategic projects. In March, Canada Infrastructure Bank and Export Development Canada extended financing to Nouveau Monde Graphite for the Matawini mine in Quebec, set to become the largest graphite mine in the entire G7. Translation: in a club of 7 advanced economies, Canada is the one G7 nation actually producing graphite at scale, and it is now expanding production at the very moment the world realizes how dangerous Chinese supply chain dominance has become. The second pillar is energy. Canada is, by Prime Minister Mark Carney's own framing, an energy superpower. With the Strait of Hormuz closed and global oil markets in turmoil, Canadian crude, Canadian uranium, and the coming wave of Canadian liquefied natural gas exports look less like commodities and more like geopolitical lifelines. Sidhu himself acknowledged this dynamic just days before flying to Paris. Speaking with Canadian press on May the 2nd, he pointed out that India needs 70% more energy by 2040 and that Canada has the capacity to fill that appetite. He noted Indian appetite for more uranium and more potash. Days earlier, Canada had concluded a $2.6 billion uranium supply agreement with India. The minister is not improvising. He is working a strategy that was already in motion before the latest crisis erupted. The third pillar is partnership, and this is where the inferences get especially interesting. Sidhu told Canadian press this week that his government is trying to wrap up 3 major trade deals before the end of 2026, with the Mercosur bloc in South America, with the 11-country ASEAN grouping in Southeast Asia, and with India. Canadian negotiators were in Brazil last week. Indian Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal is reportedly bringing one of the largest delegations India has ever sent to Canada at the end of May. Translation: while the G7 itself is fracturing under American pressure, Canada is racing to build a parallel network of trade and supply chain partnerships that does not depend on Washington's mood. SDU has been clear that the goal is not to sign deals for the sake of signing. It is to secure real wins for Canadians. See, Aries government has already signed roughly 20 strategic trade and defense agreements over the past year. The Prime Minister has personally visited 25 countries on 17 international trips since taking office in March 2025. Non-American goods and services exports rose by $33 billion in 2025 compared to 2024. The diversification strategy is not rhetoric. It is showing up in the data. If you are following the way Canada is repositioning in this new global trade order, hit subscribe and ring the bell. We cover these moves the moment they happen before the headlines catch up. Now let's break down what CEDU is actually likely to push for in those Paris meetings. Because the four formal priorities of the French G7 presidency map almost perfectly onto Canada's strengths, the first French priority is responding collectively to industrial overcapacity that distorts free trade. Even though the discussion does not formally name China, Chinese subsidization of certain sectors is the unspoken backdrop. Canada's position here is straightforward. Democracies must coordinate, not undercut each other, in the way they protect strategic industries. The second priority is economic security and critical minerals supply chain diversification. This is Canada's home turf. CEDU can table the Critical Minerals Production Alliance, the Matawini mine, the Canadian Critical Mineral Partnerships already signed with Germany, France, Italy, the United Kingdom, and the European Union, and the new round of investments unveiled last fall. The third priority is the small package low-value parcels file, the so-called de minimis question. This one is delicate for Canada because the United States ended its $800 de minimis exemption in August 2025, and Canada Post, in particular, has been hammered by the change. The fourth priority is restoring an effective multilateral trading system in the wake of the WTO's 14th Ministerial Conference in Yaoundé in late March. On every one of these files, Canada has more than talking points. It has receipts. But there is a deeper story underneath all of this. Dear viewers, Canada is no longer attending G7 meetings as a junior partner of the United States. It is attending them as the country that has done the homework. While Washington swings between universal tariffs, Supreme Court reversals, and last-minute threats against allies, Ottawa has spent the last 14 months methodically building agreements, financing critical mineral projects, deepening ties with the European Union, courting India, courting ASEAN, and negotiating with Mercosur. Carney's line at Davos earlier this year crystallized the doctrine. Middle powers must act together because if they are not at the table, they are on the menu. Translation: Canada has stopped waiting for the American security and economic umbrella to behave predictably. It is building its own roof. That is why SDU's presence in Paris on May 5th and 6th matters more than the bureaucratic press release suggests. He is not just attending another ministerial. He is signaling to France, to Germany, to Italy, to Japan, to the United Kingdom, to the European Commission that Canada is open for business, organized, financed, and willing to be the dependable G7 partner the others can build around. In a moment where the American partner is unpredictable and the global trading system is under strain, that signal is worth more than any communique. The work in Paris also feeds into something much bigger on the calendar. The G7 Leaders Summit takes place in Evian on the shore of Lake Geneva from June 15th to 17. CEDU's job in Paris is to lay the trade groundwork that Carney will then carry to that leader table 6 weeks from now. Every supply chain commitment, Every critical mineral signal, every line on multilateral trade reform that SDU negotiates this week becomes a card in the Canadian Prime Minister's hand in Evian, and here is the inference that ties it all together. The Trump administration's chaotic tariff strategy, the Supreme Court's invalidation of his EPA tariffs in February, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the threat of new tariffs on European vehicles. None of these crises have weakened Canada's negotiating position. They have strengthened it. Every time the global trading system shakes, the world looks for stable, democratic, resource-rich, rule of law partners. There are not many of those left. Canada is one of them. And Seydoux has flown to Paris to remind every G7 capital of that fact in person. Before we go, dear viewers, if this kind of analysis is the reason you came to this channel, do us a favor and share this video with one person who is trying to understand how Canada is repositioning itself in this new world. We do not chase the headlines. We track the moves that make the headlines 6 months from now. This is Canada Next. I'll see you tomorrow.